And if you look right here at the central thermal axis, which, I won't lie, gentlemen, took me about 3 weeks of absolute agony to finally crack, you'll see the exact moment the Apex module redefines off-grid luxury. Chloe paused, letting the glowing, three-dimensional hologram of the power system rotate slowly in the center of the sleek, glass-walled boardroom. She timed the silence perfectly. It was a practiced, theatrical beat, designed to let the sheer brilliance of the engineering wash over the half-dozen venture capitalists sitting around the mahogany table. She glided to the edge of the projection, the heels of her designer stilettos clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor. She reached out, her manicured hand hovering gracefully over the holographic rendering of a high-efficiency coolant line. She didn't actually touch it, of course. For one, it was a projection. For another, if it were a physical model, she wouldn't know the coolant line from the exhaust valve. The problem with the current luxury 4x4 camper market is archaic power distribution, Chloe continued, dropping her voice into that low, serious register she usually reserved for ordering a complicated martini. You take a $500,000 expedition vehicle out into the Mojave, and you're forced to compromise. You want air conditioning? You drain the lithium banks? You want to run the induction cooktop? You sacrifice the water heater. The industry accepted this space-to-weight ratio bottleneck as an immutable law of physics. She offered the room a dazzling, perfectly calculated smile. I don't really like immutable laws. A soft murmur of appreciation rippled through the venture capitalists. Julian, the lead investor at the head of the table, leaned forward. His eyes were wide, practically reflecting the blue light of the hologram. He was a shark in a $5,000 suit, but right now he was completely mesmerized. Chloe had him exactly where she wanted him, eating directly out of the palm of her hand. Sitting in the very back row of the boardroom, squeezed into an uncomfortable ergonomic chair meant for junior analysts, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my lukewarm coffee. I don't really like immutable laws. I almost choked on the bitter roast. It was a great line. Truly, it belonged in a Steve Jobs documentary. The only problem was that Chloe's understanding of physics was limited to calculating how many shopping bags she could physically carry before her shoulders gave out. I wasn't supposed to be here. I had been explicitly left off the calendar invite for this final Series A pitch. When I had asked Chloe about the meeting time yesterday, she had waved a dismissive hand, her eyes glued to her phone, and mumbled something about the investors wanting an intimate, founder-led vibe without the clutter of the engineering team. Clutter. That was me, the guy who had spent the last 8 months in a windowless, poorly ventilated basement workshop, inhaling soldering fumes and screaming at CAD software until my eyes bled. The guy who actually built the Apex module. But I had shown up anyway, slipping into the back of the room right as the presentation started. Chloe had noticed me immediately, of course. Her left eye gave a micro twitch when I walked in, a tiny crack in her polished veneer, but she recovered instantly, choosing to aggressively ignore my existence. That was fine by me. I wasn't here to interrupt. I was here to watch the show. When I was at the drawing board at 3 a.m, Chloe said, pacing slowly, her hands clasped in front of her like a visionary martyr, I realized that the solution wasn't adding more battery density. It was about creating a closed thermal loop, capturing the ambient heat generated by the power inverter and recycling it back into the primary climate control unit. It sounds simple now, but let me tell you, getting the thermodynamics to balance was a nightmare. There were nights I didn't sleep at all, just me, a whiteboard, and a whole lot of cold coffee. I took another sip of my own cold coffee. The audacity was almost poetic. Let's get one thing straight. Chloe's idea of a nightmare was the Wi-Fi dropping out during a Netflix binge. The closed thermal loop she was currently taking credit for? That was my baby. That was the result of a grueling 3-week stress test where I nearly set my eyebrows on fire because of a faulty pressure valve. I was the one who mapped the thermodynamics. I was the one who figured out how to safely route the ambient heat without frying the main circuitry. I was the one who slept on a greasy concrete floor with a wrench as a pillow. And yet, here she was, standing in a beam of holographic light, casually wrapping my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights around herself like a custom-tailored cape. It's remarkable, Julian said, breaking the silence. He adjusted his cuffs, his eyes darting over the projected schematics. You're saying this module can reduce overall energy consumption by 40% in extreme environments, while maintaining a stable internal cabin climate of 70 degrees? 42.5%, actually. Chloe corrected gently. She tapped her temple playfully. I'm a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to the math. I squeezed my paper coffee cup so hard the plastic lid popped off. She doesn't even know long division. The integration into existing chassis frameworks? Julian asked, pressing further, testing the waters. Luxury 4x4s have notoriously tight clearance under the floorboards. You're telling me this entire unit fits seamlessly? Like a glove, Chloe purred. I specifically designed the modular housing to utilize the dead space between the main frame rails. It bolts directly into standard mounting brackets. No custom fabrication required by the RV manufacturers. It's essentially plug and play. She was reciting my technical notes word for word. I had color-coded a cheat sheet for her 3 days ago, breaking down the complex engineering into bite-sized, investor-friendly buzzwords. She had absorbed it all like a charismatic sponge, completely divorcing the knowledge from the person who actually generated it. I watched her field another question from a junior partner about the cooling capacity. She leaned on the glass table, projecting absolute confidence, spinning a web of stolen brilliance. It was a masterclass in deception. If I didn't know for a fact that she had asked me what a heat sink was just last Tuesday, I might have believed her myself. She was playing the role of the visionary solo founder flawlessly, the tragic, brilliant genius who pushed through the barriers of modern engineering all by herself. My gaze drifted down to my lap. Resting quietly on my knees was a standard, unassuming manila folder. I slowly ran my thumb over the rough edge of the paper. The tactile friction grounded me. It kept the hot, rising bubble of anger in my chest from boiling over into a full-blown scream. I didn't need to scream. Screaming was for people who didn't have leverage. I had something much, much better. Inside this folder was a piece of paper that was going to turn the sleek, glass-walled boardroom into ground zero of a corporate apocalypse. I let a small, tight smirk pull at the corner of my mouth. I looked back up at Chloe. She was pointing at the holographic display again, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. The ring I bought her. The ring that up until 2 weeks ago I actually thought meant something. Go ahead, I thought, leaning back into the uncomfortable chair. Sell it. Sell them the dream. Make them want it so badly they can taste it. The venture capitalists were practically vibrating with excitement. I could see the dollar signs flashing in Julian's eyes. The Apex module was the holy grail for a multi-billion-dollar recreational industry. Everyone at that table knew that whoever controlled this tech was going to essentially print their own money for the next decade. They were ready to throw millions at her. They were ready to crown her the queen of off-grid engineering. They were completely, blissfully unaware of the trap that was already sprung. Chloe didn't know it yet, but the ground she was so confidently strutting on had already crumbled. The foundation was gone. She was just hovering in the air, a cartoon coyote who hadn't looked down yet. So, Julian said, leaning back in his plush leather chair and steepling his fingers. The air in the room suddenly shifted, growing tight and electric. The pitch was over. Now came the kill. Let's talk logistics, Chloe. Let's talk about the future. I'm all ears, Julian, Chloe said, taking a seat at the center of the table, projecting the calm, collected aura of a CEO ready to close the deal of a lifetime. I tapped my index finger against the manila folder, settling in for the best part of the show. Any minute now. As Julian started weaving a tapestry of financial jargon, talking about cap tables, vesting schedules, and Series A milestones, my mind drifted away from the gleaming mahogany table. I let the hum of his voice blur into white noise, sinking back into the memory of how a partnership that began with late-night pizza and big dreams had mutated into this spectacular corporate masquerade. 3 years ago, the word ours actually meant something. When Chloe and I first started this venture, we were the perfect cliché. Two hungry kids in our mid-20s, armed with nothing but a maxed-out credit card and a shared delusion of grandeur. The division of labor was as clear as it was necessary. I was the introverted grease monkey, an engineering obsessive who felt more comfortable talking to a TIG welder than a human being. I thrived in the grime. Our headquarters was the unfinished, poorly ventilated basement of our rented townhouse. It smelled permanently of ozone, flux, and stale espresso. Down there, I was a god among circuit boards, tearing apart standard RV alternators and rebuilding them to handle ridiculous power loads. Chloe, on the other hand, was the creature of the light. Upstairs, in the pristine living room we had converted into a makeshift staging area, she was the maestro of perception. She had a marketing degree and a smile that could talk a parking ticket into a refund. She knew how to build a pitch deck, how to cold call angel investors without sounding desperate. and how to make my greasy, convoluted tech sound sexy to people who only cared about ROI. We were a symbiotic organism. I built the engine. She drove the car. And for the first 18 months, it was intoxicating. We celebrated our first small seed grant by drinking cheap champagne on the roof of a gutted 4x4 Sprinter van I was retrofitting. I proposed to her that same night, slipping a modest diamond ring on her finger, my hands still stained with motor oil. She had cried, kissed me, and told me we were going to take over the world together. I should have paid closer attention to the singular pronoun she started using shortly after the ring went on her finger. The shift wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, deliberate erosion, like water carving away a cliff face. It started small. A year ago, we were prototyping the Alpha chassis. The weight distribution was completely botched. The freshwater tanks were throwing the center of gravity off, making the whole rig a rollover risk on steep inclines. I spent 72 hours straight in the basement, fueled by sheer panic and black coffee, redesigning the entire subframe suspension bracket to compensate for the load. It was an elegant, brutalist piece of engineering. 2 days later, during a Zoom call with a minor investor, Chloe leaned into the camera and said, with perfect casualness, "When I was reviewing the telemetry, I realized the suspension bracket was completely wrong. So I went back to the drawing board and reconfigured the subframe geometry." I was sitting just off camera, holding a wrench, my jaw practically hitting the floor. When the call ended, I asked her about it. I wasn't angry, just confused. Chloe had simply laughed, walking over to cut my cheek with her soft, manicured hands. "Babe, don't be so literal," she had purred, her eyes wide and innocent. "It's about optics. Investors don't want to see a chaotic partnership. They want a visionary. They want a singular, confident leader they can trust with their money. If I say, my engineer did this, it makes me look like a middleman. If I say I did this, it shows I have total command of the product. It's for the brand. We share everything anyway, right? Your wins are my wins." I had bought it. I swallowed my pride, told myself I didn't care about the spotlight, and went back to the basement. I let her have the credit because I loved her and because I naively believed the we was still intact. But give an inch and they take the whole damn patent. The anecdotes of her kleptomania piled up. 6 months ago, the solar array layout. Roof real estate on a camper is the most fiercely contested territory in the build. You have vents, fans, AC units, and cargo racks all fighting for space. I spent an entire week writing a custom algorithm to optimize the panel configuration, developing a cascading, overlapping track system that increased our solar yield by 15%. It was a massive breakthrough for true off-grid autonomy. I came upstairs to show her the render, only to find her uploading a highly polished graphic to LinkedIn. The caption read, "So thrilled to announce I've finally cracked the solar density problem. Just finalized my new cascading array architecture. Innovation never sleeps." Female founder, engineering clean tech. I lost my temper that time. We had a screaming match in the kitchen. I accused her of stealing my work to build a cult of personality online. Chloe didn't apologize. Instead, she flipped the script with a terrifying sociopathic ease. She cried. She accused me of being unsupportive, of being insecure about her public success, of trying to sabotage the company's momentum just because I was jealous of her networking skills. "I am the company," she had screamed, tears perfectly welling in her eyes. "When people look at this startup, they see me. You think they care about the guy in the basement? You think they want to invest in a greasy mechanic who can't even make eye contact at a networking event? I am selling a lifestyle, and you are actively dragging me down by demanding a gold star like a toddler." The gaslighting was a masterclass. By the end of the argument, I was the one apologizing. I was the one feeling small and petty. I retreated back to my subterranean cave, convinced that maybe she was right. Maybe I was just the mechanic. Maybe my only value was turning wrenches while she built the empire. So I buried myself in the work. I designed the Apex module in total isolation. I poured every ounce of my frustration, my fading love, and my bruised ego into those thermodynamics. If I couldn't be the visionary, I would be the ghost in the machine. I made the tech so undeniably flawless that it wouldn't matter whose face was on the pitch deck. Meanwhile, Chloe started taking meetings with Julian's venture capital firm. The late nights out became more frequent. She'd come home smelling of expensive gin, high-end steakhouse char, and a cologne that definitely wasn't mine, rambling excitedly about term sheets and scaling operations. She stopped coming down to the basement altogether. I was completely siloed. Then came the night the illusion finally shattered. It was 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks, a Tuesday. Chloe had stumbled through the front door at 2 in the morning after a power dinner with Julian and his partners. She was wearing a cocktail dress that cost more than my entire tool chest. She kicked off her heels, slurred a greeting in my general direction, and immediately passed out face down on our sectional sofa, snoring softly. I sighed, putting down my soldering iron, and walked upstairs to drape a blanket over her. That was when I saw her laptop sitting open on the kitchen island. The screen was awake. She had plugged it into the charger but hadn't closed the lid. I walked over, intending to just shut it down so it wouldn't overheat. But as my hand hovered over the brushed aluminum chassis, my eyes caught the bolded subject line of the email client staring back at me. Restructuring/IP transfer agreement/founder status. The sender was Julian. I froze. A cold, heavy stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. Every instinct I had, every red flag I had aggressively ignored for the past year, suddenly flared to life. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached out, not to close the lid, but to touch the trackpad. I scrolled up, and I read the whole chain. It was a masterstroke of corporate assassination, planned out over weeks of dinners and drinks. Julian was expressing concern about the liability of a 50-50 partnership structure, particularly concerning the intellectual property of the newly developed Apex module. He wanted guarantees. He wanted the tech completely decoupled from any messy founder disputes before he injected $5 million into the company. Chloe's responses were brutally, efficiently cold. Reading her words felt like watching a stranger wear her skin. Julian, I completely understand your concerns regarding my partner. She had written in an email dated 3 days prior. Let's be realistic. He is not a founder. He's essentially a high-level mechanic. He has no equity in the vision, the branding, or the strategic direction of this company. He just executes the tasks I assign him. I stopped breathing. Executes the tasks I assign him. I kept scrolling. It got worse. Here is the restructuring plan my legal team drafted, Chloe's next email read. We will formally reclassify his status as an independent contractor, effective retroactively. We are offering him a one-time 5% non-voting equity grant as a severance courtesy for his labor. He won't fight it. He doesn't have the legal bandwidth or the spine to contest it, and frankly, he's lucky to get that. My chest tightened, a sickening wave of vertigo washing over me. 5%, a severance courtesy. We were supposed to be getting married. But the final email, the one Julian had sent that very evening, the one currently glowing on the screen, was the kill shot. Chloe, the 5% buyout works for me, but the funding is strictly contingent on the IP. I need absolute certainty that the Apex module belongs entirely to the new C Corp entity, and by extension, to you. I will draw up an IP transfer agreement for Friday's pitch. I need you to sign an affidavit declaring that you are the sole inventor of the thermal loop technology. If he has any legal claim to that design, the deal is dead. Chloe's reply, sent from her iPhone just before she stumbled into the apartment, was succinct. Draw it up, Julian. I am the sole inventor. He has no claim. I'll sign whatever you need on Friday. Let's make history. I stood in the dim light of the kitchen for a long, long time. The only sound in the apartment was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic, drunken breathing of the woman on the couch, who was actively plotting to steal my life's work and throw me in the gutter. I expected to feel heartbreak. I expected to cry, to scream, to wake her up and demand answers. I expected the agonizing grief of a betrayed fiancé. But as I stared at those cold, digital words, the hurt burned away instantly, leaving behind a sharp, crystalline clarity. The grease monkey died in that kitchen. The doormat she thought she could easily sweep away vanished. She thought I didn't have the spine to contest it. She thought I was just an ignorant mechanic who didn't understand the real world. She had mistaken my love for stupidity. I didn't wake her up. I didn't say a word. I quietly forwarded the entire email chain to my personal encrypted server, deleted the forwarding record from her sent box, and gently closed the laptop lid. I walked back down to the basement, flipped on the overhead fluorescent lights, and looked at the final prototype of the Apex module sitting on my workbench. It was beautiful. It was mine. And if she thought she could take it from me just by signing a piece of paper in a boardroom, she was about to learn a very painful lesson in applied mechanics. Back in the present, Julian's voice snapped me out of the memory. So, the IP transfer, Julian was saying, pulling a thick, legal-size document from his briefcase. He slid it across the table toward Chloe. This is the final hurdle, Chloe. It legally binds the Apex module's patent rights exclusively to the new corporate entity, recognizing you as the sole and uncontested creator. We just need your signature to guarantee the tech is locked down. Once this is inked, the $5 million goes into escrow. Chloe looked down at the contract. Her eyes gleamed with a predatory triumph. She didn't even glance back at me. She didn't care. To her, I was already a ghost. I gripped the manila folder in my lap, feeling the heavy, beautiful weight of the trap about to snap shut. The morning after I found the emails, I walked upstairs with a freshly brewed cup of black coffee and set it gently on the nightstand next to Chloe's side of the bed. She groaned, pulling the duvet over her head to block out the morning light, nursing what had to be a spectacular hangover. "Morning," I said, my voice perfectly pitched to a tone of mild, unbothered domesticity. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the laptop at her. I just stood there, wearing my grease-stained work clothes, playing the part of the oblivious, subservient mechanic she had written me into. "My head is pounding," she rasped from beneath the covers. "Did you finish the thermal shielding metrics?" "Working on them," I lied smoothly. "I'll have them done by the end of the week." She lowered the blanket just enough to glare at me with bloodshot eyes. "I don't have until the end of the week. Julian needs the final, pristine CAD files uploaded to the company server by Thursday ahead of the pitch. His technical diligence guy is going to want to poke around in them. Do not mess this up for me." "For me, not for us, for her." "Of course, babe," I said, offering a small, reassuring smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Thursday, you'll have exactly what you need." She grunted in dismissal and rolled over, pulling the covers back up. I walked out of the bedroom, closed the door quietly, and let the smile drop. The trap was set. Now I just had to build the cage. I didn't go down to the basement that morning. Instead, I grabbed my keys, walked out the front door, and drove to a nondescript office park on the other side of town. The Grease Monkey act was over. I needed to become a ghost, moving completely unseen within the machinery of her grand corporate theft. My first stop was a boutique intellectual property law firm. I didn't use the company card. I knew Chloe monitored those statements like a hawk. Instead, I liquidated my personal emergency savings, the money I had been holding on to for our honeymoon, and slapped a cashier's check on the mahogany desk of a shark-eyed patent attorney named Vance. "I have a proprietary, highly complex engineering schematic," I told Vance, sliding a sealed USB drive across the table. "I need to file a provisional utility patent immediately, and I need to establish a single-member LLC to hold it. No partners, no co-founders, just me." Vance looked at the check, then at me. "We can expedite the LLC formation in 48 hours. The provisional patent is faster. As long as your technical drawings and claims are formatted correctly, we can file it through the United States Patent and Trademark Office's electronic portal today. But I have to warn you, the USPTO portal is ancient, and if you have any existing employment agreements or IP assignment clauses with an employer, this could get messy." "I am an independent contractor," I said, the words tasting like sweet, iron-rich vindication on my tongue. "According to a legal restructuring document my former partner is currently drafting, I have no equity, no voting rights, and no claim to her company's assets, which means she has no claim to the work I've done on my own time." Vance smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips. He understood the game. "Let's get you protected." For the next 12 hours, I sat in a windowless conference room at Vance's firm, drinking terrible Keurig coffee and formatting the Apex module's schematics into the rigid, archaic PDF specifications required by the government. I detailed every single claim. I documented the closed thermal loop, the cascading solar array architecture, the specific suspension bracket geometry. I laid out 3 years of my blood, sweat, and stolen brilliance onto black and white pages. When we finally hit submit on the USPTO electronic portal, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. We watched the loading screen spin. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in pitch darkness, waiting to see if there was ground beneath my feet. Then the screen refreshed. An electronic receipt generated. It was a beautiful, hyper-detailed document covered in government barcodes and application numbers, but the only thing I cared about was the digital timestamp at the very top right corner. It officially cemented my priority date. The government now recognized me, and only me, as the sole inventor of the technology. The intellectual property was locked down under my newly minted entity, Subframe Dynamics LLC. I printed the confirmation, folded it meticulously, and slid it into a plain manila folder. I had the ultimate hidden edge. Now, all I had to do was hand Chloe the shovel she would use to dig her own grave. The next few days were an exercise in psychological endurance. Living with Chloe while knowing her endgame was like sharing a cage with a tiger that thought you were blind. I had to let her believe she was hunting me, all while I was the one holding the remote detonator. Her arrogance swelled exponentially as the pitch approached. She started treating me less like a partner and more like the hired help. She would leave her dry cleaning on the counter with a sticky note instructing me to pick it up. She demanded I cook dinner because she was too mentally taxed from holding the company together. She bought a $3,000 designer suit for the presentation on the company card, justifying it to the wall as a necessary brand expense. I swallowed every insult. I did the laundry. I cooked the meals. I played the part of the defeated, submissive partner perfectly, never once raising my voice, never once challenging her authority. I let her drain every ounce of my pride because I knew the return on investment was going to be astronomical. On Wednesday night, the evening before her deadline for the server upload, Chloe strutted down the basement stairs. It was the first time she had been in my workspace in months. She stood near the bottom step, careful not to let the hem of her silk loungewear touch the dusty concrete. "Are the files ready?" she demanded, crossing her arms. "Julian's tech guy wants to review the raw data in the morning before the final boardroom pitch." "They're ready," I said, turning away from my workbench. I gestured to the master computer terminal. "I'm compiling the final CAD package now. It'll be on the company server in 5 minutes." "Make sure the metadata is clean," she snapped, a hint of nervous energy breaking through her haughty facade. "I don't want any of your messy iteration files in there, just the final, pristine architecture. It needs to look like I knew exactly what I was doing from day one." "It will look exactly like you did it yourself," I promised her, my voice eerily calm. She gave me a long, calculating look, perhaps searching for a hint of rebellion, but she found nothing but hollow compliance. She nodded sharply and went back upstairs. As soon as her footsteps faded, I turned back to the monitor. It was time for the dummy file. I couldn't just upload a blank document. Julian's tech guy would spot that in 2 seconds, and the deal would collapse before she ever signed the fraudulent contract. The trap needed to trigger in the boardroom, not in a server review. The file had to look authentic at a glance. The file size had to match a massive, multi-layered 3D render. The outer chassis geometry, the mounting brackets, the basic wiring looms, all of that needed to be there, functioning as the shiny wrapping paper. But the core? The actual proprietary physics of the closed thermal loop that made the Apex module worth $5 million? I opened the deepest, most complex layer of the SAID software, the section that housed the fluid dynamics algorithms and thermodynamic equations. I highlighted the 3 years of code that I had bled for. I hit delete. In its place, I opened a plain text document. It was an old family email I had saved for years. I copied the text, navigated back to the engineering matrix, and pasted it directly into the command lines. I embedded my grandmother's famous banana bread recipe into the heart of the Apex module. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously reformatting it so it wouldn't immediately crash the viewer program. I disguised the ingredients as material stress coefficients. 3 overripe bananas, mashed, became viscosity variable 3.0 organic compound. 1 cup of sugar translated to crystalline structural load 1.0. I even hid the baking instructions deep in the thermal flow pathing notes. Bake at 350 degrees for 45 minutes, or until a toothpick comes out clean. It was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. From a macro perspective, the file looked like a heavily encrypted, incredibly complex piece of engineering. But the moment a trained technical auditor actually tried to run the math on the thermal loop, they were going to end up with instructions for a moist, delicious baked good. I saved the file, titled it Apex module/final master v1, and uploaded it to the company server. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen, feeling a dark, euphoric thrill wash over me. The next few days leading up to the pitch were a masterclass in tension. Chloe was practically vibrating with a mix of adrenaline and greed. She paraded around the apartment rehearsing her pitch, throwing out my technical jargon with the confidence of an actor who didn't understand the script, but knew exactly where the cameras were. On Thursday afternoon, Julian actually came to the townhouse for a final strategy session. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes when they walked in. Julian barely looked at me, treating me like a piece of the furniture. "The tech guy gave the green light," Julian told Chloe, pouring himself a glass of our expensive scotch. "He said the file structure is incredibly dense. He couldn't parse all the proprietary loop equations in just one morning. But he said the chassis integration is flawless. He signed off on the technical viability." I had to bite the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood to keep from laughing out loud. Of course the tech guy couldn't parse it. He was trying to reverse engineer a pastry. "I told you," Chloe said smoothly, clinking her glass against Julian's. "I don't leave anything to chance. The engineering is airtight." "Good," Julian replied, his eyes gleaming. "Then tomorrow we sign the IP transfer and the money is yours." Julian turned to me as if suddenly remembering I existed. "Hey, buddy, could you grab some ice for this?" Chloe shot me a warning look. "Be a good boy." I dried my hands on a towel, grabbed the ice tongs, and dropped 3 perfectly square cubes into the venture capitalist glass. "There you go," I said politely. "Let me know if you need anything else." "We're good," Chloe dismissed me, waving her hand. "You can go back downstairs." I walked back down to the basement, the sound of their triumphant laughter echoing through the floorboards. I spent that evening quietly packing up my personal tools. My high-end soldering station, my customized oscilloscopes, my specialized calipers. I loaded them into the back of my beat-up truck under the cover of darkness. By the time the sun rose on Friday morning, the basement was stripped bare of anything that actually mattered. When I came back upstairs, Chloe was already dressed for the kill. She looked like a cover model for Forbes, sleek, sharp, and radiating a terrifying, synthetic confidence. "I'm heading out," she announced, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "Julian sent a black car for me. I need to be in the zone before the rest of the board arrives." "Do you want me to drive separately?" I asked, playing the fool one last time. "I can meet you there." She stopped, turning to look at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Actually, I think it's best if you sit this one out entirely. We talked about this. The board wants solo founder energy today. Your presence, it muddles the narrative. Just take the day off, relax. We'll celebrate tonight." It was the final nail. She wasn't just pushing me out of the company. She wanted to erase my existence from the room entirely while she sold my soul. "Solo founder energy," I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "Got it. Good luck today, Chloe." "I don't need luck," she said, flashing that brilliant, empty smile. "I have the apex." She walked out the door without looking back. I waited exactly 60 seconds. Then I went into the bedroom and pulled my only tailored suit out of the back of the closet. It wasn't $5,000, but it fit perfectly. I tied my tie, checked my watch, and picked up the plain manila folder resting on my nightstand. I didn't take an Uber. I drove myself. I wanted to feel the steering wheel under my hands. I wanted to be in total control of my trajectory. When I arrived at Julian's venture capital firm, the receptionist tried to stop me, citing the private nature of the boardroom meeting. I gave her a polite smile, told her I was the lead engineer for the Apex module, and had been called in for emergency technical support. The confidence in my voice, entirely unfeigned for the first time in years, was enough to get me past security. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway, the muffled sound of Chloe's charismatic voice growing louder with every step. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the boardroom and slipped into the back row just as she triggered the 3D hologram. She had noticed me, but her arrogance had insulated her from the reality of the threat. She thought I was a pathetic, clingy ex-partner coming to beg for a scrap of recognition. She thought I was just there to watch her win. So I sat in the uncomfortable ergonomic chair. I drank the terrible, lukewarm boardroom coffee. I listened to her spin lies built on the foundation of my late nights and burnt fingers. I let the venture capitalists marvel at her stolen genius. And now, as Julian pulled the thick, legal-sized IP transfer agreement from his briefcase and slid it across the mahogany table toward her, I felt the coiled spring in my chest finally release. This wasn't just about stopping a theft anymore. This was an execution. Chloe picked up her designer pen. She didn't read the clauses. She didn't hesitate. She signed her name with a dramatic, sweeping flourish, legally binding herself to a lie that was about to cost her everything. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine at the back of the room. She gave me that tiny, condescending nod. "You're dismissed." I set my coffee cup down. The soft clink echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. I stood up, the The trap had closed. It was time to show them the teeth. The ink on the document was barely dry. Chloe let out a breath she had clearly been holding since the start of the meeting, her shoulders dropping an inch as she handed the multi-page IP transfer agreement back across the mahogany table. The pen in her hand was still poised midair for a microsecond, as if she wanted to savor the permanent crystallization of her triumph. "There," she said, her voice lilting with a triumphant, breathy cadence that practically dripped champagne. She looked across the table at Julian, her eyes shining with absolute victory. "The Apex module is officially yours, lock, stock, and barrel. The future of luxury off-grid travel secured." Julian's face split into a wide, shark-like grin. He pulled the document toward him, checking the signature with the meticulous care of a museum curator handling a stolen Da Vinci. He ran a finger down the wet ink of her signature, nodding slowly to himself. "Magnificent," Julian murmured, his voice rich with satisfaction. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the assembled junior partners and legal counsel. "Gentlemen, I think we have just witnessed the birth of a market leader. Chloe, your vision, your execution, your relentless drive, it's rare. Most founders fold under the pressure of scale. You leaned right into it." "Thank you, Julian," Chloe purred, dipping her head in a gesture of faux humility that made my stomach turn over. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair, folding her hands over her lap, the very picture of an indomitable tech titan. Then, almost as an afterthought, she cast a lazy, dismissive glance toward the back row of the room. A tiny, condescending smirk played at the corner of her lips, meant exclusively for me. "You see?" Her eyes communicated effortlessly across the distance. "This is where you belong, in the cheap seats watching me win." I set my paper coffee cup down on the glass side table next to my chair. The soft clink of the ceramic against the glass was the only sound in the room, but it carried an unexpected acoustic weight. It sounded less like a cup settling and more like the heavy bolt of a prison cell sliding shut. I didn't slouch anymore. I didn't hunch my shoulders to look like a submissive, grease-stained mechanic. I rolled my shoulders back, straightened the lapels of my tailored suit, and stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, and entirely uninvited. Chloe's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, her eyebrows drawing together in a sharp, irritated crease. She hadn't expected me to move. She certainly hadn't expected me to stand. "Oh, sit back down," she hissed under her breath, her voice tight with sudden, nervous irritation. She flashed a strained, manicured smile at Julian, trying to pivot past the interruption. "Excuse my associate, Julian. He gets a bit confused when he's allowed out of the basement." Julian didn't laugh. He frowned, his eyes narrowing as I stepped out from behind the row of chairs and began walking down the central aisle toward the mahogany table. The heavy silence of the room shifted, turning from an atmosphere of celebratory corporate backslapping into something sharp, cold, and electric. I walked at a measured pace, my shoes clicking softly against the expensive wool carpet. I didn't look at Chloe. I kept my eyes locked dead on Julian, maintaining an easy, conversational posture that completely ignored the social etiquette of the room. "Brilliant pitch, Chloe," I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls with a casual, cheerful clarity that made the air feel thin. "Really, the passion, the hand gestures, the breathless recounting of those grueling nights staring at whiteboards? 10 out of 10. Honestly, Meryl Streep couldn't have sold a fictitious work ethic better." Chloe was on her feet before I even reached the end of the table. Her face had drained of its professional, corporate polish, replaced by a sudden, ugly mask of panic. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice cracking slightly, abandoning its low executive register entirely. "Security! Someone get him out of here. He's trespassing. He's unhinged." "Sit down, Chloe," I said smoothly, not even breaking stride. "We're family, remember? Your wins are my wins. I'm just here to help you unpack the technical specifics of your great triumph." Julian half rose from his chair, his expression hardening into a dangerous glare. He looked back and forth between us, his legal instincts finally kicking in. "Who the hell is this guy?" "Chloe, you said your engineering team was completely decoupled from the corporate entity." "He is decoupled," Chloe babbled, her hands fluttering in frantic bird-like motions as she tried to block my path to the table. "He's just a disgruntled, low-level contractor who handles basic assembly. He doesn't know anything about the architecture." "Is that right?" I stopped about 4 feet from the table, looking down at Julian with an easy, unbothered grin. I reached inside my jacket, my hand slipping into the interior pocket. I could feel the crisp, heavy texture of the paper inside. "Because it's funny. For a guy who only handles basic assembly, I seem to remember spending the last 8 months designing every single millimeter of the thermal loop architecture that you just sold this firm for $5 million. Lies, Chloe screamed, her voice hitting a sharp, hysterical octave. He's lying. He's trying to extort me because I cut his hours. Julian, don't listen to him. He's a nobody. Julian held up a single hand, silencing her. His eyes were cold, calculating little slits of ice. He looked at me, sizing me up, sensing the terrible, ticking weight of the moment. Talk, he commanded quietly. I'd love to, I said brightly. I pulled the plain manila folder out of my jacket and let it drop onto the gleaming mahogany surface. It slid across the polished wood, coming to a rest directly on top of the fresh, wet ink of the IP transfer agreement Chloe had signed 5 minutes ago. Julian, you strike me as a smart guy, I said, leaning my hands casually against the edge of the table and looking the venture capitalist dead in the eye. You run extensive due diligence before you drop millions of dollars into a seed round. You check the cap tables, you verify the corporate filings, you look at the background checks. But tell me, did your technical team check the United States Patent and Trademark Office registry this morning? Julian went completely still. His hand hovered over the corner of the contract. What are you talking about? I'm talking about administrative housekeeping, I said, taking a slow, relaxed step to the side. You see, about 3 weeks ago, I started having this nagging suspicion that my lovely fiancé was planning to execute a hostile takeover of my life's work. I noticed some weird emails, some unauthorized restructuring drafts, a general lack of basic human decency. So, being a pragmatic kind of guy, I decided to protect my intellectual property. I tapped the manila folder with my index finger. I walked down to a patent attorney's office, formed a single-member LLC called Subframe Dynamics, and filed a provisional utility patent for the Apex module under my own name. The USPTO electronic portal processed it, time-stamped it, and locked it down 21 days ago. It is legally bound to me and me alone. The room dropped into a vacuum of sound so absolute, you could hear the faint hum of the overhead projector. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then, color slowly began to drain from Julian's face, leaving his skin a sickly mottled gray. He looked down at the manila folder, then up at Chloe, whose mouth was opening and closing like a stranded fish. That's a forged document, Chloe choked out, her voice pitching up into a frantic shriek as she lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table. Her knuckles were stark white. He printed that out this morning. He's faking it. The designs belong to the company. They've always belonged to the company. They're sitting right there on the company's server. Oh, are they? I asked, turning my head to look at her with an expression of mild, almost academic curiosity. The files on the company's server, the ones Julian's technical auditor gave the green light to yesterday afternoon? Chloe swallowed hard, her eyes darting wildly. Yes, exactly. The pristine CAD package, the raw data. It's all right there on the cloud for anyone to verify. Ah, I said, clicking my tongue against the roof of my mouth in mock disappointment. Right, about those files. I reached into my pocket again, pulling out my smartphone. With a quick swipe of my thumb, I unlocked the screen and brought up a local text file. A backup copy of the exact script I had uploaded to the company server 2 nights ago. You know, Chloe, you really should have looked inside the folder before you let your tech guy review it, I said, my voice dropping into a smooth conversational purr. Because when you demanded the final master package, I complied. I uploaded a file that matched the exact size, the structural naming conventions, and the outer chassis geometry. From a macro level, it looked like a dense, highly sophisticated piece of engineering. Julian's head whipped back toward me, his eyes blazing with a sudden, uncontainable fury. What did you put in the server, mister? He snarled, his voice dropping into a lethal register. I looked right at Julian, smiling broadly. I deleted the thermal loop calculations, I said clearly. I stripped out every single line of proprietary thermodynamics that makes this module work, and in their place, I pasted my grandmother's award-winning banana bread recipe. A collective gasp sucked the remaining air out of the boardroom. I disguised the ingredients as material stress coefficients. I continued, warming up to the performance, relishing every single syllable. Viscosity variable 3.0 is actually 3 overripe bananas, mashed, Crystalline structural load 1.0 is a cup of white sugar, and if your technical auditor actually tries to compile the code on the main fluid dynamics matrix, the system won't generate a cooling output. It's going to give him step-by-step instructions on how to bake a moist, delicious loaf at 350 degrees for 45 minutes, or until a toothpick comes out clean. Julian's chair went flying backward, crashing hard against the glass wall behind him with a deafening bang. He didn't even look back at the wreckage. He lunged across the table, his face purple with a blind, incandescent rage that could have powered a small city. He grabbed Chloe by the lapels of her $5,000 designer suit, hauling her forward so hard her head snapped back. "You bitch!" Julian roared, his voice cracking with venom. "You absolute lying, fraudulent bitch! You tried to sell my firm a baked good?" "Julian, no, it's a trick. He's lying. He's trying to frame me." Chloe screamed, flailing wildly, her manicured nails clawing desperately at Julian's wrists as he shook her like a rag doll. The carefully constructed facade of the brilliant female founder had completely disintegrated, leaving behind only a frantic, howling animal caught in a trap of her own making. "You signed a legally binding warranty," Julian bellowed right into her face, spittle flying from his lips. "You certified under penalty of corporate fraud that you were the sole creator of this technology. You just committed wire fraud and securities misrepresentation to extract $5 million from my firm." "I'm a partner. We're partners," she sobbed, mascara streaming down her cheeks in thick black rivers, completely ruining her makeup. "We're getting married. Tell him, you asshole. Tell him we're partners." Julian shoved her away with such force that she stumbled backward, tripping over her own designer stilettos and crashing hard into the mahogany chairs, sending a stack of legal binders flying across the floor. Julian turned his burning bloodshot eyes on me. His chest was heaving, his tie askew, his pristine corporate veneer completely obliterated. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger straight at my chest. "Who are you?" he hissed, the words dripping with pure, unadulterated poison. "What do you want?" I slowly pulled the manila folder back toward myself, sliding the official government-stamped provisional patent certification out of its sleeve and letting it catch the light of the overhead projector. "I'm the guy who owns the patent," I said softly, my voice cutting through the noise of Chloe's pathetic sobbing on the floor. "And if you ever want to see a working model of the Apex module in a luxury camper, you know where to find me. My LLC is currently entertaining bids, but I have a feeling your firm is going to be a little too busy dealing with federal fraud investigations to make a competitive offer." Julian stared at the patent paper, his face draining of whatever color was left. He looked down at Chloe, who was curled up on the carpet like a broken doll, weeping uncontrollably into her ruined suit sleeves. I didn't say another word. I slipped the patent back into the manila folder, tucked it neatly under my arm, and turned around. The security guards who had tried to block me at the door earlier were now standing frozen in the entryway, staring wide-eyed at the disaster zone inside. As I walked toward them, they instinctively stepped aside, parting like the Red Sea, making way for a man who had just dismantled an empire with a pastry recipe. I walked out of the glass-walled boardroom, down the long corridor, and out into the blinding, beautiful sunlight of the street, leaving the wreckage entirely behind me. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung shut behind me with a muffled click, cutting off the symphony of catastrophe I had orchestrated. Inside, the room was a war zone of corporate violence. Julian's lead attorney was already barking frantically into a burner smartphone, initiating emergency asset freezes and drafting preliminary injunctions for wire fraud. Across the floor, slumped against a stack of overturned mahogany chairs, Chloe was a puddle of ruined mascara and expensive silk, her sobs echoing faintly through the soundproof glass as she realized that her grand, meticulously engineered rise had culminated in a catastrophic face-first crash into the concrete. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I crossed the sprawling reception lobby with a light, unhurried stride, the manila folder tucked securely under my arm like a winning ticket. The security guards who had tried to intercept me 20 minutes prior now flattened themselves against the polished marble walls as I passed, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and sheer terror. I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out onto the sunlit pavement of the city street. The air hit my face, crisp, sharp, and entirely free of the toxic corporate smog I had been breathing for the last 3 years. I unlocked my truck, slid into the driver's seat, and tossed the folder onto the passenger side. As I turned the ignition, the engine purred to life with a clean, steady roar. I pulled away from the curb, merging into the afternoon traffic with a deep, full breath that felt like my first real oxygen intake in half a decade. True to form, the implosion that followed was swift, brutal, and utterly comprehensive. Within 48 hours, Julian's venture capital firm unleashed a scorched earth legal barrage that made medieval sieges look like a game of tiddlywinks. They hit Chloe with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for securities fraud, breach of contract, and fraudulent misrepresentation. Because she had legally signed her name as the sole creator and guarantor of stolen intellectual property on that fateful Friday, the liability bounced off Julian's firm and landed squarely, heavily, and exclusively on her shoulders. The startup dissolved faster than cotton candy in a rainstorm. The company server, the branding, the sleek pitch decks, and the empty shell of the corporate entity were seized, liquidated, and sold off for pennies on the dollar to satisfy mounting legal fees and court-ordered restitutions. Chloe's digital footprint evaporated overnight. Her carefully curated LinkedIn profile, the one where she claimed to be a visionary tech founder, was scrubbed clean, replaced by an ominous silence that spoke volumes to anyone with an internet connection. Word travels fast in the venture capital ecosystem, and when a founder tries to fence a stolen thermal loop system laced with a pastry recipe, you instantly become radioactive. Every VC firm on the East Coast blacklisted her with prejudice. By the end of the month, she had packed whatever designer luggage she had left into the trunk of her car and moved back home, retreating to the suburban comfort of her parents' basement. Ironically enough, the very place she had once acted like she was light years ahead of. As for me, I didn't need to rebuild from the ashes. I had built the foundation elsewhere. Within 2 weeks of the boardroom explosion, my patent attorney and I sat across the table from the acquisition scouts of a legacy multinational recreational vehicle manufacturer. They didn't want to buy my company. They wanted to buy me and the exclusive manufacturing rights to the Apex module. They didn't care about flashy elevator pitches or buzzword-heavy slide decks. They looked at the raw thermodynamics, ran the real-world stress tests, and realized they were staring at the holy grail of off-grid engineering. We negotiated a clean, airtight licensing agreement. No partners, no co-founders, no equity dilution, just a massive upfront cash advance, followed by a generous, non-negotiable royalty percentage on every single unit shipped out across the globe. Which brings me to right now. 6 months have passed since the day I walked out of that glass-walled prison, and I am currently sitting at the absolute center of my own universe. I am parked on a remote elevated ridge deep in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Through the expansive, double-paned panoramic windows of my custom-built expedition rig, the late afternoon sun is painting the rolling horizon in brilliant shades of amber, violet, and bruised gold. Below me, the valley stretches out in a sea of endless pine and jagged rock, completely untouched by the noise and madness of the corporate world. Inside the cabin, the environment is an absolute masterclass in comfort. Outside, the mountain air is biting, dropping into a sharp, freezing chill as the sun begins to dip below the tree line. But in here, it is a steady, perfectly balanced 72 degrees. I lean back into the plush, ergonomic leather upholstery of the dining banquette, taking a slow sip from a mug of freshly brewed coffee. I don't hear a roaring generator. I don't smell exhaust fumes. There's no strained electrical hum, no flickering lights, and no frantic alerts about draining lithium banks. Everything around me is running on absolute silent perfection. The climate control system is humming along effortlessly, drawing a fraction of its power from the cascading, ultra-efficient solar array mounted invisibly to the roof rails. Beneath the floorboards, the closed thermal loop architecture, the exact system I spent 8 months bleeding over in a damp basement while someone else planned my obsolescence, is quietly cycling ambient heat, recycling every joule of energy with mathematical elegance. It works because I built it. It thrives because I protected it. And I am enjoying it entirely on my own terms. My phone buzzes softly on the wooden table beside my coffee mug. I glance down at the screen. It's an email notification from my patent attorney, confirming the quarterly royalty disbursement has just cleared into my private, single-member LLC account. The numbers scrolling across the screen are staggering, enough to fund a dozen more workshops, a fleet of new experimental rigs, and a lifetime of absolute financial freedom. I swipe the notification away, lock the screen, and set the phone down face down on the table. I don't care about the numbers. I care about the quiet. I look out the window one last time as the first evening stars begin to punch through the deepening blue of the sky. The air is crisp, the coffee is hot, and the silence is magnificent. The grease monkey didn't just survive the machine. He built a better one, locked the door, and threw away the key.